One of the things that you should note about Chinatown is that a lot of the businesses utilize the sidewalk. They might not belong to the actual store. Sometimes the businesses lease out or rent out the front of their stores to other people to sell their produce. So note that if you're buying produce on the street in front of the actual business, you should not actually walk into the store with that produce. You should pay for it first outside. Now we're coming up on our first stop on the tour. It's called the Chinatown Supermarket of Manhattan. People come to supermarkets in Chinatown for efficiency. They come here just as a one-stop shop, get all they need to get, and just go. They maximize product, so some of the aisles are actually more narrow. A lot of things are prepackaged. You can't really pick out the things you want. And another thing to note about the cultural differences in Chinatown supermarkets is that the cashiers usually do not make eye contact. So don't feel like they have something against you if they don't say hi to you or greet you. That's just how it is in these supermarkets. If you have questions, generally ask a manager or someone who looks like they speak English, or ask someone if they can direct you to someone that speaks English. Most of that should not happen when you're in line with the cashier. They will not know what's going on, they won't know English, and they'll just call someone over. I'm just getting some stuff for our meal today, so I just got some ground pork. Shout them out, what do you think this is?
It's a mall.
Looks like a regular mall, but it's actually a grocery store. It's actually a supermarket as well, and you'll never know that. No. I'm gonna pass around photos about what it used to be. Here you go. This is like a Chinese pharmacy. My parents would come here and make us soup if we're sick, if we have a cold, or if we're breaking out in pimples. We'll come here and get some goods and make some soups and tonics at home. Look at the things they have back there. They have shark fins, they have dried scallops. Here, there's people shopping in the outside section of this produce market. You see, there's no real line being made here, like your regular supermarket or your regular store. So sometimes there's one person out here handling different customers at a time, but he'll know who you are. So if you're taking too long, he'll take another customer in front of you. It's not really line cutting, there's just no real line system out here. That's not rude. He's doing it for efficiency. This is a star fruit. Star fruits are native to the Philippines, Indonesia, Malaysia, Bangladesh, and Sri Lanka. But it is cultivated in places like Latin America, the Caribbean, and southern USA. Weiwa Market, we're gonna go inside. I'm gonna introduce you to the owners. They're a good family. It's a family-run business. Now, if you look around at the produce, none of it is pre-packaged. You can actually choose what you want. Take your time, you can ask questions. Now, the May family is really gracious enough to actually open up 2 star fruits for us to sample. These are roasted peanuts. They actually have like a milky flavor after you eat them. Yeah, I don't know how they're cooked, but try one. Usually when I have one, I can't eat just one. In the guide that we gave you today that highlighted the ingredients, how you choose a good fish. You look at the fish's eyes for clarity. You make sure the eyes are clear. You touch the fish, and if the indentation bounces back, then you know you have a good fish. Right. Sipe. If you guys want to see him prepare it, I encourage you to come this way. The business owner said inside some of these tanks, that's striped bass in the middle. So, the fish that he's making for us right now is tilapia. Okay, we're gonna head down this way. No. There's actually a lot of commercial activity going on. Now, this is very unassuming, but if you look downstairs, there's actually a seafood market in here as well. This is my favorite art piece in Chinatown.
We've been walking for the last hour and a half, so you can sit, I'll stand, and I'm going to be showing you what we're doing today, introducing you to some of the ingredients, and also talking a little bit about the techniques that we're going to use in the meal today. But all of you are going to be as hands-on as you want to be, and you may be doing some things that you've never done before, so I encourage you to watch me, and also if you don't know exactly how to do something when you get to your team to do it, please ask questions. What we're making is going to, probably for a Chinese person, seem like, at least I hope, a fairly familiar meal. So no particularly exotic ingredients, nothing even particularly expensive, because certainly we're trying to do something on an affordable budget. There's 4 recipes that we're going to make today. Fish, poached whole fish, As you can see here, I'm trying to dry out a little bit these guys that you just bought and you saw them live in the store, right? So this is about as fresh as it can get in this neighborhood. And what we're gonna do is really, really simple. We're gonna poach it. That means heating up some water in a pan, putting the fish in the pan, covering it, cooking it until it's done. The second recipe we're gonna make is a very simple stir-fried bok choy. These are baby bok choy. There's actually many different kinds of choys. So this is just one example. You could also get the kind that has more of a greenish, light green stem with a dark green leaf. Even if you don't see that particular type of green in the market, you can get many other types and do virtually the same recipe. So that's the second one that we're going to do, and we're going to talk a little bit about using a wok and some basic principles of stir frying. That's not something that we've done before. The third recipe is a somewhat more complex recipe. It's a tofu with black bean sauce. And I'll show you the ingredients when we get to that point, but the tofu we just bought today, and most of the other ingredients we had on hand, we're also going to add some ground pork to the recipe. You can use turkey instead, or you can omit the meat entirely. The fourth recipe is a fried rice. Super simple, and I was just talking to my friend Jen over here the other day about fried rice and whether she makes it at home or not. And it's one of those interesting things. You can get it in a restaurant. To me, it feels like the quintessential homemade food, because for me, it's what you do when you have leftover rice. And it's plain, and it's maybe a little bit dried out. Fried rice is a great way to liven it up in the pan. I didn't have leftover rice, so I made fresh rice today. So there's fresh rice already cooked in there, and that's what we're going to use for the fried rice recipe. That's also a recipe where we're adding a little bit of meat to showcase a typical Chinese ingredient, this sausage, lapchan sausage, but you can also omit it. Fried rice is one of those things you can just do oil, a little bit of garlic and onion, you know, maybe a little vegetable, some soy sauce, that could be it. Or you can add a lot more to it. This recipe is going to have a little egg, it's going to have a little sausage, and a couple of other seasonings. So, as I said before, we're going to do a really simple poaching of the fish. You could also steam the fish. And this is the more, perhaps the more common, the more traditional method of doing it, where you would take a wok, like this, and put a little wrap in it, like that. Put a plate in, put water underneath, bring it to a boil, put the fish in there, cover it, and steam it. That would be steaming it. Poaching it means the food that you're cooking is submerged in the water instead. And that's what we're going to do today, because we need the wok for a couple of other dishes, right? One thing I do like to do, though, when I'm cooking a whole fish, is that I really like to eat all of the meat, including the belly and all of this, because that's actually where a lot of the most flavor comes from. That's the fattiest part of the meat. I like the fat. But I don't like the bitterness that comes from the organs, right? Because this just had organs pulled out of it. I'm going to use a little bit of boiling hot water to clean out the cavity. I'm just going to pour a little bit. You see how it kind of clears up the skin on the outside? And it cleans out some of the blood on the inside. Most of the work you're going to be doing is actually preparing the seasonings. So that means taking ginger, taking a good amount of it, peeling the brown skin off, and shredding it, which means cutting it into the finest little strips that you can possibly manage, because we're going to eat them raw. This garnish is just going to go on top of the fish after it's cooked. We're going to pour a little bit of soy sauce on top, and then we're going to pour some hot vegetable oil. The oil is cooked until it's piping hot, not smoking, so not burning. And then you just pour it on top of the fish, and it just very lightly cooks the shredded scallion and shredded ginger that are on top. But they're still basically a raw garnish. So you want to cut the ginger and the scallion as thinly as you possibly can. So the next recipe that I'm going to talk about, bok choy. So some of these recipes, all the magic comes before you cook it, and some of it comes after you cook it. The fish, the seasoning comes after you cook it. But for me, the most important part of making a stir-fry green vegetable is cleaning and drying the vegetable before you cook it. Because what is a stir-fry? It's frying in a pan, not sauteing, not braising, not boiling, right? Braising and boiling involve water. Stir fry, you want the vegetable to be bone dry, or as close to it as you can get. So I know that another way that you can do this if you don't have a salad spinner is you just wash the vegetable beforehand. Maybe even the morning before you're going to cook it that night if you have it at home, and you just leave it uncovered, so not in a plastic bag. You can leave it in the fridge, or you can leave it on the counter. Just ginger, some rice wine, chicken broth, and sugar, and sesame oil. So super simple, and we're going to try and cook this at the last minute. So a lot of this is also preparing things, and then we're all going to check in and make sure that we're cooking things to be finished more or less at the same time. Okay, that's the bok choy. The third is the tofu with black bean sauce. The tofu here, the first thing that the team for this recipe is going to do is take this out, rinse the pieces, and then just cut them and lay them onto a couple of plates. And we have some extra plates sitting around here, and what we're going to do is just put some paper towels on it and let it drain. Because tofu, it's packaged, it's stored in water. Of course, a lot of it is water. It's a very, has a lot of water in it as a product. But we want to remove some of that, add a little bit of salt, and that helps firm it up. It also helps it cook better so that it doesn't fall apart as quickly in the pan. So the tofu is going to get laid out and salted for a little while. And then the pork right here is just going to get cooked in the pan, and each item is going to get cooked separately, right? So first the pork is going to get cooked, take it out of the pan, actually kind of wash and dry the pan so you have a nice clean surface again to cook on. Then add the tofu, then add everything else, then add the turkey back in, the pork back in, excuse me, and it finishes all on the pan together. So this is a fairly quick recipe to cook as well, but requires a little bit more prep of all of the separate ingredients. And then the last recipe is the fried rice. And the rice is in the kitchen. It's sitting on the stove in a pot and in a bowl, just trying to cool it down a little bit. It's actually better if we don't cook it when it's still hot. You want it to have a little bit more texture. If it's still hot, it's going to get more mushy in the pan. And we're going to add a couple of seasonings that are kind of nice and distinctive, but not at all required. The lobster sausage. This will be cut up into a very fine dice. There will be some scallion in there, and soy sauce, some eggs. That's actually one thing that there's probably, for every Chinese family, there's a different way of adding eggs to fried rice. You could cook it separately. You could cook it with the rice. You could add it at the beginning. You could add it at the end. What we're going to try for today's recipe, but is by no means superior to any other method, is cooking the egg first. So just whisking the egg, putting it in a hot wok, and as it goes in, turning the wok around so that it makes as large of a pancake as possible, and as soon as it sets, flip it over, take it out of the pan, and then cut it with a knife into shreds. Another way you could do it, which is how I grew up doing it, is you make the fried rice with all the seasonings and everything added into it already, and the last thing you do is, while it's still cooking, whisk the eggs, pour the eggs on top of the rice, and then just stir it up until it cooks in the pan with everything else combined. So those are the 4 recipes. The ingredients that you see here, and I know that were highlighted in your handout, one thing I definitely want to make sure everyone gets familiar with, this is one of my favorite ingredients. It has so much flavor. This is actually, the history books, or at least somebody on the internet says, that fermented black beans predate soy sauce. So this is an even older seasoning element of Chinese cooking than soy sauce. And we're going to bring it into the 21st century and add it to our dish today. As you can see here, it's kind of dusty looking. That's salt. And that's also just the product of the beans having been fermented and dried quite a lot. So some of that might also just be the particulate of the bean, of the starch coming out of the bean, and looking a little bit dusty on the outside. It's not dirty, but the salt sometimes is a nice thing to rinse off before you use the bean. It depends on how many other ingredients in your dish have salt in them as well. So if you're making a dish that has fermented black beans and also has soy sauce, that's another thing that will bring a lot of saltiness to the dish. So if you don't want it to be too salty, then you could rinse these before you use them. On the other hand, if this is the only source of salt in your recipe, you might as well just use it and use the flavor, because when you're rinsing them off, you are losing a little bit of the flavor of the black bean as well. Well, the important thing is that everything is wilted, which it definitely has. Okay, who wants the tail, who wants the belly? Meaty part. The fatty part, like the belly, or the more lean?